My parents stole $188,000 from my bank account to buy my sister a luxury car. So I took legal action and left them in financial ruin. I was standing on the beach, watching the sun go down in the distance. My friend Ashley was laughing beside me as we enjoyed our expensive cocktails. It was the first real vacation I had taken in years, and I finally felt like I could relax. Then, my phone vibrated. I glanced at the screen, expecting just another random notification, but instead, it was a bank alert. $188,000 withdrawn. At first, I thought it must be a mistake, maybe some kind of system error. But then, a terrible feeling hit me. That was my money, the money I had saved for years to buy my first apartment. And there was only one possible explanation. My parents. They had access to my bank account. I had given them permission a long time ago, trusting them because they were my parents. I had only allowed them to use it in case of an emergency or something truly important. I felt like I couldn't breathe. My hands shook as I dialed my dad's number. It kept ringing. No answer. I called again. Still nothing. Ashley noticed something was wrong and asked what had happened, but I couldn't even speak. I tried calling again and again. After 10 minutes of silence, my dad finally answered. "What's wrong?" He asked casually, like I had just called to chat. I didn't waste time. "Why did you take $188,000 from my account?" There was a short pause. Then, as if it was no big deal, he said, "Oh, that. Your sister finally got a good job. She starts tomorrow, and we couldn't have her taking the bus to work in a suit. So we used the money to buy her a new car. Bye." And just like that, he hung up. I sat there, staring at my phone in shock. The sound of the waves and people talking around me faded into the background. Ashley put her hand on my arm, looking concerned. "What happened?" she asked. When I told her, her eyes widened in disbelief. She tried to calm me down, but I couldn't stay there. There was no way I could just sit on that beach and pretend everything was okay while my parents used my life. Savings to buy my sister a car. My vacation was over. That night, I booked the first flight home. We were supposed to stay for 4 more days, but I couldn't wait. Ashley understood, though I could tell she was disappointed. Still, she didn't argue. The next morning, as soon as we landed, I didn't even take Ashley home. I called her a cab, apologized, and told her I had to leave. She nodded and told me to call her later. Then, I drove straight to my parents' house, and there it was, shining in the sunlight, a brand new car. I pulled into the driveway and just sat there, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. That car felt like an insult. My money, my hard-earned savings, had been turned into a fancy vehicle my sister didn't even need. I took a deep breath and got out. The front door was open and I could hear laughter inside. My parents and sister were sitting together, acting like nothing had happened, as if they hadn't just stolen everything from me. I walked in, and my mom smiled. "Oh, Joseph, you're back early. How was your trip?" I just stared at her. Was she serious? Was she really acting like everything was fine? I looked at my dad, calmly drinking his coffee like he didn't have a care in the world. Then at my sister, scrolling through her phone, not even looking up. "The trip?" I said finally. "You mean the trip I had to cancel because my own parents stole $188,000 from me?" My dad sighed and set his coffee cup down. "Joseph, don't be dramatic. We didn't steal anything." I blinked in disbelief. "You took my money without asking and bought my sister a car. How is that not stealing?" My sister finally looked up from her phone and rolled her eyes. "Calm down. Joseph, I needed a car. You'll make more money." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I turned back to my dad. "So what? You thought I wouldn't care? That I wouldn't notice?" He shrugged. "We knew you'd notice eventually, but it was necessary. She has a great job opportunity, and it wouldn't look good if she showed." Up on the bus, my anger boiled over. I clenched my fists, barely able to think straight. "She doesn't even have the job yet, does she?" The room was completely still as I turned my gaze toward my sister. She refused to look at me. I let out a dry chuckle, but there was no real amusement in it. "This is unreal. You used my money to buy a car she doesn't even have yet?" My father waved his hand as if it wasn't a big deal. "She'll have it soon. Besides, we meant to. Tell you, we just assumed you'd be okay with it." I turned away and stepped outside. I needed air. I needed to clear my mind. But the moment my eyes landed on the car, sitting there as a clear symbol of their betrayal, I knew exactly what I was going to do. I spun back around and walked into the house. "I'm taking the car back." My sister jumped up from her seat. "What?" My father scowled. "Joseph, don't be ridiculous." "I'm dead serious," I said firmly. "I'm returning it right now." Before they could react, I snatched the keys from the counter and headed for the door. That was when everything descended into chaos. Before I even reached the car, my sister came running after me, shouting my name like I had just announced I was destroying her life. My parents were right behind her. "You can't take it," she shrieked, grabbing onto my arm. "Just watch me," I said, shaking her off and unlocking the car. My father stepped in front of me. "Joseph, be reasonable. It's already paid for. There's nothing you can do now." I let out a bitter laugh. "Oh yeah? And whose money was used to pay for it?" He exhaled loudly, rubbing his temples as though I was the one being unreasonable. "Just let it go. You'll make that money back. Your sister needed this." I shoved past him and got into the driver's seat. My mother yelled something, but I ignored her. I started the engine, backed out of the driveway, and drove off. My heart was racing. This was not how I imagined spending my first day back, but if they thought I was just going to accept this, they were completely wrong. I drove straight to the dealership. My phone kept buzzing. First my sister, then my mother, then my father. I ignored every call. As I pulled into the lot, I felt a brief moment of relief. Maybe this would be simple. I'd explain the situation, return the car, get my money back, and be done with it. I walked inside and approached a salesperson. "I need to return this car. It was bought using my money, but I never gave permission for the purchase." The salesman frowned. "All right, sir. Do you have the purchase receipt?" I shook my head. "No, my parents bought it, but they used my money." "I have a bank statement showing the withdrawal." He nodded slowly. "Okay, let me check our system. Whose name is on the purchase?" I gave him my father's name. He typed for a few moments, then suddenly stopped. His expression shifted, and I immediately felt uneasy. "Sir," he said carefully, "you are not listed as the owner of this car." I stared at him. "What are you talking about?" He turned the screen slightly so I could see. The car was officially registered under my sister's name. I felt like I had been punched in the stomach. "No, that's not possible. They bought it with my money." "I understand," he said in a calm tone, "but legally, your sister owns the car. Only she can return it or sell it." I stepped back, my hands shaking. My parents hadn't just taken my money. They had made sure I had no way to take the car back. My phone buzzed again. My sister was calling. This time, I answered. "You put the car in your name?" I asked, my voice ice cold. She actually giggled. "Obviously, it's mine now." I hung up. I couldn't even find the words to respond. I sat there gripping the steering wheel so hard I thought it might snap. My own family had betrayed me. They had stolen my money, bought a car, and made sure I had no legal right to it, but they had underestimated me. Taking a deep breath, I pulled out my phone and started making calls. If they wanted to play dirty, then I would too. First, I called my bank to see if I could dispute the transaction. No luck. Since I had given my parents access to my account, the withdrawal was technically authorized. Next, I reached out to my friends, hoping someone knew a good lawyer. Most were just as shocked as I was, offering sympathy but not much else. Finally, my friend James came through. "I know a guy. He's aggressive. You'll like him." He sent me the number. I didn't hesitate. Right there, sitting in the dealership parking lot, I made the call. The lawyer, Robert, answered after 2 rings. "Tell me everything," he said. I explained the whole situation, how my parents had taken my money, used it to buy a car, and registered it under my sister's name, leaving me with no way to claim it. Robert listened carefully before saying, "This isn't just a personal dispute. This could actually be fraud." That caught my attention. I switched to speakerphone and drove straight to my parents' house. When I walked in, my mom, dad, and sister were sitting in the living room, probably assuming I had come back feeling defeated. But instead, I leaned against the wall, crossed my arms, and said, "Hey, Dad, Mom, Sis, say hello to my lawyer." Their expressions changed immediately. Robert wasted no time. "Mr. and Mrs. Carter, your son has informed me that you withdrew his money without his permission. Based on the details, this situation could qualify as financial fraud, theft, and misrepresentation. If Joseph chooses to move forward with legal action, the consequences could be severe." The room fell completely silent. Then my sister suddenly shouted, "He wouldn't do that! We're family!" Robert let out a short laugh. "Family doesn't steal $55,000. My dad cleared his throat. "Joseph, be reasonable. This isn't necessary." I stared straight at him. "No, what's unnecessary is thinking I'll just let this go." Robert continued, "You have a choice. Joseph can take legal action, which will be costly and very public, or you can resolve this immediately. Sell the car, return the money, and avoid a court case." My sister's face turned pale. My mom looked like she was about to burst into tears. For the first time, my dad actually looked unsure. I let the silence drag on before finally saying, "You're in serious trouble," and I meant it. My dad folded his arms. "We're not selling the car." Robert sighed. "All right, Joseph, I'll begin preparing the legal documents. This case is going to court." My mom panicked. Wait, let's talk about this." Robert completely ignored her. "Joseph, document everything, text messages, bank statements, any conversations. We need proof that they knowingly did this." My sister's eyes widened. "What does that mean?" I grinned. "It means I'm going to make your life extremely difficult." Then I walked out. I wasn't bluffing. I immediately drove to Ashley's house. Her parents were home, and as soon as they saw my expression, they sat me down. I explained everything to them. Ashley's dad, David, who used to work in finance, listened carefully. Then he leaned back in his chair and said, "They think they're smart, but they're actually clueless." I frowned. "What do you mean?" "They put the car in your sister's name, but paid for it with your money." "Yeah," I said. "That's the issue." "No," he corrected. "That's your advantage." Then he told me exactly what I needed to do. The following morning, I arrived at the DMV right when it opened. I requested records for the car's purchase. Since I had proof that my money had been used, I filed a fraud report. The car was flagged, which meant my sister couldn't sell it, transfer ownership, or do anything legally with it until the matter was settled. After that, I went straight to my bank and froze my account to stop my parents from withdrawing any more money. By the afternoon, I had officially filed a police report for unauthorized use of funds. I didn't press charges yet, but I made sure it was officially recorded. That's when my dad called. "You actually went to the police?" "Yep," I replied, casually sipping my coffee. "Oh, and also the DMV and the bank," he exploded. "You're tearing this family apart over a car." I didn't hesitate. "No, that happened when you stole from me." My mom took the phone, crying. "Joseph, please, we never thought it would reach this point." I almost laughed. "Oh, so you mean you didn't expect me to fight back?" Silence. Then my sister grabbed the phone, her voice shaking. "You locked the car?" "Yep." She screamed like a spoiled child throwing a tantrum. That's when I knew I had won. The next morning, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Call after call, text after text, all from my dad, my mom, and my sister. I ignored them completely. Then my sister sent a message that actually made me laugh out loud. "You ruined my life! I can't even drive my car anymore. Hope you're happy." I was, but I wasn't finished yet. Later that day, my phone rang. It was my lawyer, Robert. "They tried to change the car's ownership this morning," he said. I almost choked on my drink. "What?" "Yeah, they probably thought they could just put it under your dad's or mom's name instead. But since you already reported it as fraud, the DMV flagged it. Now they can't do anything with it." I shook my head. "Do they really think they can get away with this?" "Oh, they're panicking," Robert replied. "And there's more. They hired a lawyer and he called me. That caught my attention. They got a lawyer. Yep. He wanted to talk about whether we could drop the fraud case." I laughed. "Did you tell him he's out of his mind?" "Not exactly, but something close to that." Things were moving quickly for them and I was enjoying every moment. But then something happened that I didn't see coming. That night, I got a call from Ashley's dad, David. "Joseph, your dad just showed up at my house," he said. I immediately stood up. "What?" "He wants to talk to you. He looks exhausted." I let out a deep sigh. "What did he say?" "He wants to meet up. Says he wants to fix things." I rubbed my temples. After everything, after trying to go behind my back again, now my dad suddenly wanted to talk? David's voice lowered. "I don't trust him, but it's your choice." I slowly exhaled. I wasn't sure what my dad was planning, but one thing was clear. He was desperate, and I was about to find out why. I agreed to meet him, but only on my terms. No home advantage for him. I told him to meet me at a coffee shop near Ashley's house. A public place, neutral ground. When he arrived, he looked 10 years older, as if the stress from the last few days had drained him. He sat down, rubbed his face, and sighed. "Joseph, this has gone too far." I took a sip of my coffee. "No, it hasn't gone far enough." He shook his head. "Your mother is falling apart. Your sister is heartbroken. Do you really want to go through with this? Do you want to tear this family apart over a simple misunderstanding?" My jaw tightened. "A misunderstanding? You took $55,000 from me. We didn't." "Steal it," he snapped, then quickly lowered his voice when a few people nearby turned to look. "We just borrowed it." I scoffed. "You put the car in her name. That's not borrowing. That's making sure I could never take it back." He let out a sharp breath. "Okay, fine, we made a mistake. But your sister needs that job. She needs that car." "She doesn't even have the job yet," I shot back. "You took my money for a car she doesn't even need." He leaned forward. "Joseph, we don't have the money to pay you back." I froze. He sighed heavily. "We thought we could, but things are tight. If we sell the car, we'll lose money on it and still won't have enough to pay you back." I stared at him. "Then why did you think it was okay to take it in the first place?" He didn't answer. He just sat there looking miserable. For the first time, I saw the fear in his eyes. Not because he felt bad about what he did to me, but because he finally realized he had trapped himself in a bad situation. I leaned back, crossing my arms. "So what do you want from me?" He swallowed. Hard. "We need time, just a few months. I'll figure something out and pay you back." I tilted my head. "And I'm supposed to just trust you after everything you've done?" Silence. Then he said something that sent a chill down my spine. "If you take this to court, we could lose the house." I blinked. What? The house is in bad shape financially, he admitted. Legal fees, being forced to pay the money back, it could push us over the edge. I stared at him. I knew my parents had money problems, but I didn't know it was this bad. For a brief moment, I felt something close to guilt, but then I remembered what they had done to me. I took a slow breath. That's not my problem. His face fell. He had expected me to give in. I stood up. You have one choice. Sell the car now and return whatever money you can. If you don't, I'll take this all the way and I don't care what happens to the house. His hands clenched into fists. Joseph, please! I walked away. I had given them a way out. If they didn't take it, then whatever happened next was on them. After that meeting, I never heard from my dad again. No texts, no calls, nothing. I figured he was scrambling, trying to figure out his next move. 2 days later, my mom showed up at Ashley's house without warning. Her eyes were puffy and red, like she had been crying for days. She grabbed my hands. Joseph, please, just stop this. I pulled my hands away. Did you sell the car? She shook her head. Your sister refuses to sell it. I let out a cold laugh. Then we have nothing more to talk about. Tears streamed down her face. You don't understand what you're doing. Your father is trying to refinance the house. If this goes to court, that's his problem. I cut in. Not mine, she sobbed. But we're family. I stared at her. No, family doesn't steal from each other. She had no response. That night, my father finally called. His voice was stiff. We're selling the car. I let out a breath. Good. The dealership offered 20% less than what we paid, he admitted. But the deal is done. That's not my problem, I said. He was silent for a moment before saying, We'll send you the money tomorrow. The next morning, I got a notification. $176,000 had been deposited into my account. It wasn't the full amount, but it was enough. Enough for me to finally walk away. I packed my bags, took what I needed, and left my parents' house forever. Ashley's family welcomed me with open arms. Her dad even helped me open a new bank account, one my parents would never have access to. And just like that, I was free. A week later, my sister sent me a message. I hope you're happy. We lost money because of you. I blocked her number. I wasn't just happy. I was finally at peace. When the money arrived in my account, I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Relief. It wasn't the full $188,000, but it was enough to move forward. I wasn't going to waste another second on people who only saw me as a source of money. The next day, I cut the last tie. I went back to my parents' house for the final time. Not to argue, not to fight, just to collect the rest of my things. When I walked in, my father barely looked at me. My mom tried one last time to make me feel guilty. We were only trying to help your sister. I didn't reply. I packed my bags, grabbed my paperwork, and left without saying another word. A few weeks later, I put a down payment on an apartment. It was smaller than I had planned, but it was mine, completely mine. I didn't tell my parents. They found out through a relative and texted me. My dad sent a short message. Congratulations. But my mom? She sent a long message about how family should always stay together and how one day I'd regret cutting them off. I didn't reply. And my sister? She never even got the job. Turns out she wasn't the company's first choice. They hired someone else instead. So in the end, all the stolen money, all the lies, all the drama, it was all for nothing. I heard she had to buy a used car with her own money. That was karma. I wasn't angry anymore. I had my life back. And most importantly, I had learned. A lesson I would never forget. Being related by blood doesn't mean you can trust someone, and I would never make the mistake of trusting her again.